going on, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning in to the 404 Show. It's Friday, February 12th, 2016. It's always a great pleasure when we can bring someone on this program who has never been on before.
That's right.
Is it me?
It's you, Russ Rocha. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time ever, Mr. Vladimir Duthiers. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
Thank you guys for having me.
It is our pleasure. It is a long time coming. You, sir, are a CBS News anchor.
He doesn't look anything like a count. We were talking about this last week. Is that when I first heard your name, I was
you
like,
thought
this guy's
Vlad
a count.
the Impaler.
Yeah,
or some, not even vampire count. Just like a general count.
A general count, yeah.
And that's the first thing I said. I said, I didn't know counts were potentially not vampire.
Sure.
That's like a big part.
But you know that a count is the highest level, like, of, I think a count, it's like count and then king.
Really?
I could
so
be
above Duke.
I think it's or maybe it's king, Duke, count.
Right.
Or maybe not.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
So
you're
But
on
it's
your
up
way
there. It's up there. I'm on my way up there.
I had no idea that was the hierarchy. I was just like, oh, a count is what they give out like a party favor.
No, I
No.
think, or maybe
It
it's
is
the lowest for all I know.
It's important.
It's like a
You
consolation
get a castle.
prize.
All counts
You
on
get
a castle. You got to be pretty
I
high
didn't
up
know
there.
any of that crap. Anyway.
No, let's talk about his actual accomplishments.
Absolutely. So Vlad and I met, what was it, maybe like a year and a half ago? When CBSN started, and we were talking a lot before we started recording about your very interesting and diverse sort of path to where you are right now in your life. So right now you are a CBSN anchor, CBS News correspondent, and you talk about how you also have decades of your life that you spent in finance before you even started doing this.
Yeah, yeah.
So you told us this story,
Right.
and it led up to right at the point where you're like, I need to change my life.
You're a captain of industry. You've mastered the world of finance.
I was captain
flying
of the ship.
around the world, being a totally dope badass.
Yeah.
And then suddenly catharsis hits.
Yeah.
And you have, explain how this all played out.
And to that point about like, I took a colleague of mine to Hong Kong one year. He had never traveled with me abroad for a business meeting. And just to give you a sense of like where I was,
Sure.
We fly into Hong Kong and I'm like, dude, we have to go out like as soon as we land because of the time difference and we don't want to get screwed up with our internal clocks. So we'll just go out.
Just having a strategy for that alone shows you how much you have that much preparation.
Right. I mean, like I've been doing it for a while. So we go into this. So I'm like, I'm going to take you to like one of my favorite spots in Hong Kong. And he's like, okay. So we walk into this like club bar thing, and there's like a torch singer like on the stage, and she's doing, fly me to the moon.
Nice.
And I come in, and he's with me, and she's like, let me play Hi Vlad Among the Stars. And he's like, double take. He's like, wait. Dude, what just happened?
It's just,
am
I being punked right now?
Right.
What's going on?
He had no clue. Like, he's like,
That's
dude,
amazing.
like that. What? I'm like, I come here a lot. He's like, but we're in Hong Kong. I'm like, yeah, I know. It's like, it was that kind of a life, right?
You were living it.
I was doing, and I had, I was working for a great company. And, but so I was in Stockholm on this business trip with a colleague. And I had this epiphany that although I enjoyed finance and I'd spent almost, 19 years, close to 20 years of my life in finance, it was not very fulfilling for me. I was a journalism undergrad major. I wrote for my high school newspaper, had a radio show in college, wrote for my college newspaper.
What college did you go to?
I went to the University of Rhode Island. Go Rhodey. Christiane Amanpour also went there. John King,
really?
CNN
Look
correspondent.
at
Oh, I didn't know they have like a legacy of like...
They kind of do.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't a huge journalism program, but, Christiane is one of the world's great legiondary journalists.
Yeah.
And John King also went there and some others. And so I was at URI and I was writing for the school newspaper. And I watched like 60 Minutes religiously the way I still do. But even then, it was like I'd watch Ed Bradley and Mike Wallace and Morley Safer and all these guys. And the evening news. And I was all over the place. I'd watch Sam Donaldson on ABC, and I'd watch, Ted Koppel and Tom Brokaw and John Chancellor, all these old school guys. I knew who the Murrow boys were, Eric Severide. I wanted to be a reporter. That was my goal. But somehow we were talking about how I got sidetracked from that, but then all of a sudden I found myself going like, what am I doing? Like,
and that was decades.
That was decades later, dude. It was like I was 37.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was old. Sure. I am old. And
that's not old.
Yeah, I know.
Don't tell me that's old.
I mean, as someone that has gone through that, I'm 32, and certainly has gone through that period of like, I'm going to change my career. Can I even do that?
Can you even do it? Right.
Is it allowed?
At that age?
Is it allowed?
Yeah.
And will people like laugh at you? And
Right.
they kind of did. And it was like, so I came back and I made a list. I was on the flight home and I made this list and I'm like, well, what can I do? What are my interests? Sure. And there were a couple of things that were running through my mind. One, like I sort of have subscribed to this like Buddhist notion that, the key to immortality is doing something that is worth remembering. And I didn't feel up until that point in my life that I had done anything worth remembering. It was all great for me
Sure.
and for my, loved ones, but it had done nothing for the world. And I know people think that's like cliched or corny, but that's literally how I felt. And so I started writing down like, teaching and like federal law enforcement. I don't like, doing something,
Yeah.
And then I kept writing like writer, reporter, journalist, but I thought that's going to be so hard because it's such a tough industry to break into, and I'm fairly old or older, but it's what I loved and it's what I love doing. I was a political junkie, news junkie, and so I started to think about it. I get back to work and in New York, and my boss, who was the CEO of our international division at the time, was a really cool guy. And I kind of confided in him. I said, look, I'm going through this thing and I want you to bounce it off of you. And he goes, okay, so you want to go into journalism? He's like, that's a dying industry, dude. He's like, why would you, And I said, I don't know. This is what I really think I was meant to be doing.
Yeah, this is coming out of me.
Yeah. So, So I start trying to, like, while I'm still working, I start like sending out my resume to a couple of people, and I go and interview at a couple of places which will remain unnamed because they looked at my resume and they're like going through it and they're like
what on your resume is indicating reporter?
Right. And also it's like 3 pages long of like things
weird.
that I've done. Like I was in when I was in the Army and I'd done all these things, and they're like, you've been to like 30 countries and you're a managing director. This is a production assistant job.
Oh, sure.
It pays like $28,000 a year. And I'm like, I'll take it. And they're like, no, you won't.
It's like well, here, let me draw this out for you. What's your name, Vlad? Okay. That's what you made in a month at your old job.
Wasn't that it? But it was literally like, they were just like, no. And they're like, you have a team of people that report to you from all around the world.
Yeah.
And you're going to be working for somebody who's like 26.
Sure. Yeah.
And they're going to be screaming at you like, go get me coffee and like, go print these out.
So what's going on in your head? You're like, this sounds great. Sign me up.
I was just like, I want to learn. I want to learn. And I just said, if you give me a shot, I know I can do this. And there's another kind of a Buddhist aspect to that, which is that, we're always learning. We're always students. Like life is about like if your life is a cup, you want to empty the cup once in a while. And if you are half empty, you can refill that vessel with knowledge and information.
But I'm into that.
You can dig it, right?
I will entertain every sort of school of thought. Mm-hmm. When you're emptying the cup, what are you emptying?
The garbage, the stuff you don't like in your life.
Exactly. The things that that you don't need anymore. The things that it's about decluttering. And that's why Zuckerberg wears the hoodie every day and Jobs wore the black because you want to declutter your life of the things that you don't need. You don't need to make a decision to like changing your picking out an outfit every day. You just wear the same thing.
Yeah.
So I was like, I can do that. And I can just see an HR person going, this guy thinks like journalism or television production is glamorous, and he's going to find out real quick that it's not, and it's terrible, and he has a mortgage to pay. He's not even going to be able to pay his mortgage, and he's going to
and for them, it looks badly on them if they hire someone that's miserable and has to quit after a couple months.
There's
6
a lot
months.
of variables playing against this whole thing.
Exactly. So I had a couple of moments where I did that, and then I realized that it was not going to work out, that that I could get hired this way. So I applied to Columbia Journalism School, and I figured I made a deal with myself. I went to URI, which is a great university, and I love the University of Rhode Island, but I wasn't the best student when I was there. I was a gentleman C, let's say.
I like that
term.
Right?
A gentleman C.
The George W. Bush.
That's what I was like bushy. And so I was like, if I can get into Columbia, and that will be maybe the universe indicating to me that I should move forward with this. If I can't, then, I should just continue, like, flying. I'll fly to the Four Seasons in Tokyo.
I will continue to have this awful, luxurious life.
All right. And so I applied to Columbia, get in, and my idea was applying to graduate school would mean that I would be able to get an internship. And if I got an internship,
then your foot's in the door.
And I'm off to the races.
Sure. And then it's not that as weird.
It's not as weird, even though
I'm sure it's
what you should have seen. So I get into Columbia, and then I first march into this career services office, and Julie Hartenstein, who's still there at Columbia, says to me, she's the same thing. She's like, you want to, so if we put you in an internship, like, and then you kind of get a job offer, what are your expectations of how you're going to get paid? I'm like, I don't know, like, do we even get paid at that level? And she's like, okay, you're totally ready for this. Because a lot of people who are career changers, even at Columbia, go there and they think, like, I've been doing something for 10 or 15 years. I should be paid commensurate with, like, my
Rich is outrageous. Yeah.
Right. And so, not in journalism, right? Sure. So anyway, so I go there and I start J school, and I apply for an internship at CNN. And I get the job. I get this internship. And then, like, a week or so before the internship, we go on a class field trip, true story, to CNN. And I've not started the internship yet. And Anderson Cooper is our guest speaker.
Okay.
And Anderson comes in, and there's, like, me and my, like, class, and, he comes in and he does his, like, here's how I started, and here's, like, the things that I, would recommend for young budding journalists. And, I keep raising my hand and asking questions. Like, I'm like, Mr. Cooper. He's like, oh, you can call me Anderson. I'm like, okay. So, because it's super embarrassing because he's, like, super famous, and, like, I'm in awe of Anderson Cooper.
Sure.
Like, and I asked a couple of questions, and then my professor goes, oh, Vlad's going to be an intern here, like, starting, like, in a week. And he goes, oh, dude, come by and see me when you start your internship. And I'm like, okay, I definitely will.
Yeah.
And I start the internship, and I never go by and see him. In fact, like, he sits, Jeff, if you've been to the CBS newsroom, so you see where the CBSN anchor desk is, and you see, like, where all those people sit. Like, I sat, like, right there, and he sat, like, he'd come down every night, and he would do his show.
He's within earshot.
He's like as close as you are to me, and I'm just like, I can't, like, You
don't want to, in the middle of the show, yo, Andy.
Yeah, hey, what's up,
what's going on?
Remember me? Like, the one nerd who was, like, asking you questions in the meeting. And so, but the long story short is I go into, eventually a producer says, well, if he said that to you, he means it.
Right.
So I go into his office one day, and she's like, Vlad, Anderson, remember Vlad? And he's like, hey, what's up? Like, you never came by. And I'm like,
I've been waiting here.
I know. He's like, what's up?
He's marking the days off.
I know.
No Vlad.
He's such a snob, right? Anderson's like, he won't even talk to me. And so we start talking, and this was in, so I'd been in my internship for like 3 months or 4 months, and I had just gotten an offer, actually, from I was working for Christiane Amanpour on her show to be a production assistant after the internship ended. And this was in December of 2009. And so Anderson and I are talking, and he, was intrigued by my background and, like, the decisions and why I was here. I'm 38 years old, and I'm wearing I wore my Wall Street clothes as an intern.
That's hilarious.
Like, every day.
This is such a good story.
Like, I was wearing, like, a 3-piece suit, like, and people, like, one day Ivan Watson, who's, like, a senior international correspondent for CNN, came in, and he was, like, on our floor to talk to Christiane, and he runs into me, and he's like, excuse me, sir, I'm looking for Christiane Amanpour's office. I'm like, oh, Ivan, I'll take you there. And he's like, so what are you, like a VP? And I'm like, no, I'm an intern. He's like,
stop it.
Why are you wearing that suit? And I'm like,
dress for the job you want?
Yeah, right. I don't know. Yeah, exactly.
It's the only clothes I have.
It's the only clothes I have. So Anderson's intrigued, and we are talking, and, like, he finds out that, my father's family is French and my mother's family is from Haiti. I have Haitian ancestry. And he's like, oh, dude, I love Haiti. Haiti's, like, an incredible country. I've done so many reports from there. And do you speak the language? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh, that's so cool. And he's like, all right, like, like, good catching up. Like, if your internship is up, like, send me your resume, blah, blah, blah. Fine. 3 weeks later, the earthquake in Haiti happens. And that night, the night of the earthquake happened at about 5 p.m. local time, our time here in New York. I get a call from his executive producer, and he says, hey, Anderson's on the last flight out of JFK tonight, and he wants to know if you want to go as, like, his interpreter / like, production assistant or whatever. And I had never done anything in journalism except be an intern.
Sure.
And so, and they're like, and we didn't know how bad it was going to be when we got to Haiti. So the EP was like, hey, just like pack for like 3 days. Like, 'cause, you know, these things will, like, you know, we'll do a couple of days and then we'll probably move on to another story. But when we got there, obviously it was the biggest, most devastating, most tragic incident like in decades, right? And we were there for an entire month and change. And I got hired during my time in Haiti. I got hired as a staff. I was a freelancer for Amanpour. CNN offered me a staff job on AC360 and Mission Cooper 360. And that's how it started. I started as a PA and then an AP, and then I would do my own kind of reporting, enterprise reporting on the side, and I would go to Anderson and ask him to help me with my scripts or with my video. And I still hadn't decided if I wanted to be a producer or an on-air person, but he helped sort of guide me, and he has been and is an incredible mentor throughout my entire career, and the career that I've had since I came into news. He's been a sounding board along with the executive producer of that show, Charlie Moore, who basically allowed me to blossom from being a PA to an AP and then eventually a reporter. And so and that's how I got
amazing.
here. Yeah.
That's like when you hear these stories of like battlefield commissions where people are like and like crazy stuff happens, and they move up the ranks like because of all the amazing stuff that's going on. And obviously you were very involved in that, but
it literally it was. And it's funny, I was talking to my mom about that, and we were talking about Haiti and how it was such a tragedy. I mean, I was talking about this to some of our young APs yesterday at CBS, and I was saying how you can't imagine how devastating. I mean, you guys will remember the coverage of all the news.
You can picture it in your head, but until you're on the ground, I'm sure. Yeah.
And you see thousands of bodies in a pit, or hundreds of bodies lining the street as people pull them out. And it was something that I hope I'll never have to live through again. But my mom and I were talking, and she was like, there were two things that we sort of had a discussion about. One, that could have been me in one of those pits, right, buried in an unmarked grave in Haiti, if I had just happened to be visiting family or friends or somebody there, right? Because there were a lot of Haitian Americans who died in that earthquake. And also, the way life is, isn't it strange that this country that is part of my ancestry somehow also gave birth to my career?
Yeah, right. Yeah, really interesting.
And you don't want to think about it that way. I mean, a lot of journalists' careers are made on like the terrible things that happen in the world. Yeah. But this one was especially close to me. And I was there for like a month, and I came back, and I wasn't pressing either. I wasn't like, I want to be a reporter. I was just sort of like, I'll do what I need to do to learn. And I'm not going to bother anybody and say I should be on the air or something. It was basically Anderson who would say, "Can I see your video, or can I see your stand-ups?" And he'd give me some guidance, and then CNN, to CNN's credit, they cultivate young talent, and I say young meaning like young in the industry, and they then gave me a shot to be a correspondent. And what's funny about that, real quick, is that they originally said, we want to send you out to London to be a business correspondent for the network because of my background, and I was like, I don't know,
Done it.
They're like, what, we figured that would be such a natural fit for you. Yeah. I'm like, I kind of left business because I'm not that into it. And he's I mean, I like business stories, but I don't like, it was sort of I didn't want to stand in front of a magic wall and go, here's what the market did. Right.
Or even the best business story is never going to be the emotional impact of like a serious.
Which was not what you were chasing.
Exactly. Yeah. So he goes, well, the only other thing we got, to be frank with you, is we need a reporter in West Africa, specifically Lagos, Nigeria. And I'm like, okay, that sounds good. He's like, are you serious? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, he goes, all right. He goes, you're not going to have a producer. He's like almost trying to dissuade me.
He's basically saying, don't do
he's
this.
like, it's going to be hard. At least in London, there's writers and producers, and they can help you grow. And I was like, no, but that sounds good. And he goes, all right. So I fly back to New York, and I come into the CNN office in New York, and Anderson goes, hey, come into my office. He goes, you're going to be a CNN correspondent. That's incredible.
Yeah.
First of all, he wrote letters of recommendation to the brass at CNN, but he goes, yeah. And he goes, and you're going to Nigeria. I go, well, about that. I flew home, and I was thinking I was probably too hasty. In Nigeria, people get kidnapped. It's like, there's things that stuff happens. And I go, I don't know if I want to do that. He goes, well, did you say you were interested in that?
He's like, because.
Yeah, he's
That's
like,
a tough situation,
he's like, I haven't heard London. I don't think London's on the table. Yeah. He's like, you're going to Lagos, dude. Yeah. And I was like, all right. And he's like, and he actually, again, he was like, look, Vlad, it's an incredibly important position. West Africa is an incredibly important region. There's a lot of things going on there. And if you can prove that you can do the job of being an international correspondent in one of the toughest bureaus, and it is one of the toughest bureaus in the world for any news organization, then I have no doubt that when that assignment is up, like, bigger things will come on the horizon. And he was absolutely right. My time was up in Nigeria, and I ended up at CBS News.
What does that bureau look like?
It's my office is smaller than this room, and it's like we all work out of like this production center where the BBC is and other news organizations. Yeah, so we're all like looking out for each other,
right? Kind of in it together.
But in terms of like the people in your bureau, like how many people?
There were maybe 20 or so people from different like from other African countries. My camerawoman, her name is Frida Okutoyi. She's amazing. She was from Kenya, CNN camerawoman. The BBC guy was a British guy. His girlfriend was from Kenya. She was a producer. There were Nigerians, some South Africans. So
it's such an amazing story, man.
I know, it's
and we
crazy.
were just talking about how I know you, but I don't know you.
Yeah,
and now that's it. Now I have everything. Now I can write the book. Because I knew about Anderson Cooper, and that's a relationship you still hold on to.
Yeah, I mean he has been, like I said, he's a sounding board for a lot of the things. And, Anderson is a CBS News correspondent. People ask me, like, what's your goal? The goal is, like, Anderson or, 60 Minutes and things like that. But Anderson does 60 Minutes.
Do 60 Minutes.
And, and he's obviously also a CNN correspondent. But he's just, there are a lot of people in my life that have helped me and nobody gets to any place in life without, like, somebody giving you a leg up or holding the ladder down for you.
Yeah.
But to me, like a guy like Anderson has had such a profound impact on my life because he never looked at me and thought like, okay, everybody wants to do this, and whatever it is that he saw in me, I'm thankful every day that he helped cultivate that out of me, and help point me in the right direction. And whether it was writing my scripts initially, I was a production assistant, and a colleague of mine who was also a PA at 360, we flew to Haiti on our own dime and shot a story on a child molester. But when we came back, we had just done it for like, I was going to submit it as my master's project at Columbia. And for whatever reason, I didn't end up doing that. And one day I came into work, and Charlie Moore, the EP, said to me, you should send that script to like Standards and Practices because we're going to run that package tonight on 360.
Wow.
It was a 5-minute piece. I was I wasn't a reporter. Right. My story ran with me as the reporter on CNN in primetime.
I think I can't tell what I'm more impressed with your whole story, because for me it's like, oh my God, the amazing will, like
and that's the thing. So when you're talking about people giving you a leg up or whatever it is, and obviously there have been great people helping you out, but it's clear to me at every step of this way, at least in you describing it, that there were instances where most people would be like,
that's enough.
I'm not going to go to Nigeria. I'm sorry.
I mean, look, first of all, it was a huge hit on my income, obviously, because I started as an intern. I was the last unpaid internship class, I think, at CNN.
Oh wow.
And then I had these huge tuition bills at Columbia,
right?
And then I had a mortgage and and had living expenses, and I wasn't getting it, and no money was coming in.
Yeah.
So I had some saved, but a lot of it went to. So it's like for 2 years, whatever I had saved went for tuition and living, and what the work I was doing was not really any kind of compensation that added to the pot at all. Right. And then even when I got promoted to being a correspondent, Nigeria, believe it or not, is one of the most expensive countries to live in if you're, not Nigerian.
Interesting.
Right. I mean, because it's an oil rich economy, and they just squeeze you for like if to have a modern and normal apartment, it's extremely expensive.
Sure.
Right. And then, yes, you are dealing with people who are much younger than you, who are your bosses, and who television is a tough business where you get yelled at a lot in the control room, and people freak out over things, and it's hard. You know, I'm sitting there one day, I was getting screamed at by somebody. I'm thinking like, dude, I am 38 years old.
What's happening?
Yeah. And this guy is like going off on me. But I was able to take a step back and say, I've only been in television, or I've only been in journalism a year or 2 years. He's been in journalism 5 years or 6 years. He knows what he's talking about. I don't know what I'm doing or what I'm talking about. So I may be older. I may have traveled more than he has. I may even know more about like even the story that we're covering, life in general.
But this guy's been here.
This guy knows what he's doing.
Yeah, it's amazing, and maybe it plays into the your sort of like outlook on everything, the way you were sort of explaining to us earlier. But maybe that's to have that kind of attitude and calmness.
It's the only way to do it.
Yeah. It's amazing.
You got to be able to take your ego out of it. That's people say to me, "How did you become an intern?" And like, because you say, whatever I thought I was before this, I am not that. Yeah. And even if I thought that I was that, nobody really gives a crap. Right. And so I'm not going to let this bother me. Even now, when somebody gets in my ear and they say that was stupid, that you see me on CBS, and I sometimes say things that are like they
just really bad.
Yeah, I don't, and I'm like, oops, sorry. Yeah. But that's only because I've been very successful, and I've had a what some people would say is a fairly rapid ascent into the industry. I mean, when I got the job at CBS, and one day, Chris Lick, the executive producer of CBS This Morning, asked me to fill in for Charlie Rose for a whole week.
It's pretty awesome.
On CBS This Morning.
Amazing, yeah.
And my mind was blown. I actually was, again, I still sometimes think like, are you serious? Because I'm really not that good, dude.
You know who you called, right? Is that?
I know, yeah. Is it really me, or you want somebody? And I remember I texted with Anderson, and he wrote, again, something that just made me feel good. He said, from being like an intern in June of, I think I know what it was. I sent him a TBT, like a Throwback Thursday picture of that class field trip with him with my J school class. Yeah. And I was like, Throwback Thursday. And he's like, when was that? And I'm like, June of 2009. And he goes, so from being an intern to co-anchoring the CBS This Morning with Gail, King and Nora O'Donnell in 5 years is...
Who's doing that story? I want to know who's doing that story, because that's something I want to read and watch.
But one thing, Jeff, and I'm so glad you guys have me on this podcast, because one of the reasons I love journalism, and one of the things that makes it so exciting for me and why I've always wanted to be a journalist, is to talk about all the stuff that... Like I've looked in your rundown that we're going to talk about today. We've been talking about me. It's all about me.
No, but that's important because
I think it's interesting. Yeah. I mean, people don't have a lot of insight. Obviously, people see people on TV, reporters, anchors, correspondents, what have you. But the process behind it of like how people get to where they are, I think it's personally fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, man.
It's all good. It's not just hubris. It's fun.
And it's not, and sure, you could sort of parlay that into the conversation, like, but this is a CBS company. It's all connected.
Right.
We're learning about, how this sort of came to be. And when CBS did acquire our company, I guess the fruits of that merge have shown up in things like Interactive and with CBSN and stuff like that. So just for a second, before we get into the stories that we have here in our rundown, I do want to get to those. I want to talk about CBSN with you for a hot second and get your sort of vibe as to like, where you see that sort of going. Because I think, being the first, to me, when I first started to like understand what CBSN was, I was like, well, this is really important. Right. This is something that no one else really does.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you're very intimately involved in it, and I've been super psyched to be a part of it as well in the capacity that I've been. But this is your day-to-day. How do you sort of see it in the landscape of this evolving news, sort of atmosphere?
So, Leslie Moonves, our boss, during the earnings call this week, he talked about CBSN. That was one of the things that he talked about. And it was interesting because when this was being launched, I was super interested in it, even though I didn't think I'd be a part of it, because I was hired at CBS to be a correspondent. And it was just, by happenstance that they said to me, hey, do you want to be a part of this? And so, but the thing about CBSN is, Leslie has said that this looks like this is something that is going to be very, very important to the organization. And that's because we are tapping into, we have younger viewers. The average age of the people who watch CBSN is under 40, right? The amount of time that they spend. Now, this is the thing that a lot of people will say, well, who wants to watch something on the internet for more than 5 or 10 minutes? Well, CBSN is proving that the average time in some cases is, 25 or 26 minutes, in some cases close to an hour, where people will watch what's going on, and so and finally, I guess the last component of it is when people say, well, is this new for CBS? It is and it isn't. CBSN is CBS News.
Right.
And so what that means is, what Edward R. Murrow did, and David Rhodes and I, the president of CBS, have talked about this a couple of times, that, in a way, I kind of liken what we're doing to what the Murrow boys did, in that CBS radio at the time existed, and they sent Murrow out to, Europe to record classical music and features pieces, and then all of a sudden the looming clouds of war started to appear, and all of a sudden he figured out, well, no, there's something of interest here that I can report back. And I think that some people back in New York, CBS New York, were like, wait, what? Like he wants to talk about like the rise of Hitler? Nobody. But that's the same thing. We're the legacy of bringing news to people and doing it, understanding who we are as an organization, who we have been for the last 75, 80 years, but just doing it on this platform. That's really the only difference, is that we're doing it on this platform and we're opening it up to a new generation of people who might not be into, watching television, on a regular basis.
And I see it as this constant 24/7 sort of like backbone to the coverage that the entire sort of bigger picture is responsible
for.
And that's the way I kind of position it to people when I go, oh, you should check out my CBSN segment. I did a little thing on that. And they're like, oh, okay. Well, they watch and they're like, wait, what is this?
Right.
And that's how I sort of, do the elevator pitch to what exactly.
I mean, I'm looking here. So, Mr. Moonves said, on this earnings call that, CBSN has attracted more viewers every single quarter since we launched in November of 2014.
That is good.
And clearly, and he says that clearly this is where the future of news is going to be, and we're going to be there. And so
we're there.
Yeah, we're there. So
it's fun.
That's cool.
It's good stuff. I love being a part of that. I haven't been on a little bit.
Yeah, we'll get you back on, bro. We need you back on.
Cornering you right now. And
we're gonna do that. Sure like this is your way to like entice
it's
me.
It's all part of the plan, Vlad. I'm there's a method to the madness. All right. We're going to pivot into some of the stories that we have in our rundown. A lot of stuff transpiring over the week. Let's get into it. Twitter had a very strange week.
Yeah.
Twitter is going through some, identity crisis situation sort of stuff.
That's not just this week. That's been going on.
Yeah, they're sort of trying to figure it out, right?
Definitely. I think this week, maybe they're more self-aware of it. I read a piece in the New York Times, and this all goes back to an earnings sort of call that they had, where they're like, yeah, we made a little bit of more money than we did last quarter, but our users just, it's not happening.
Yeah.
Like, they can't grow their user base, bottom line. And Wall Street sees that as like this major issue.
Yeah.
Which is understandable, right? I think, Wall Street has this projection of what they want Twitter to be like a Facebook or a Google sort of situation. And we're quickly, well, maybe not quickly, but we're finding out that that's probably not the case. So this New York Times piece was really sort of interesting. That it was Farhad Manjoo wrote it, and he said Twitter really needs. And I don't want to say like this is what I've been saying the whole time, but I definitely talked about.
But this is what you've been saying the whole time.
Well, and obviously he can put it a little more eloquently than maybe perhaps I can. But Twitter is not this money-making, Silicon Valley powerhouse.
Right. It wasn't built. People sort of have viewed it as the quote unicorn, which is like the Silicon Valley term for these companies like Uber that, were built and are valued at outrageous sums. Certainly Twitter is worth a ton of money, but it was never, the core idea of it is something that's very, very hard to monetize and very hard to take advantage of. And this is what they're running into, not to mention the fact that they can't add additional people because especially younger folks are not using Twitter. They're using Snapchat or they're using whatever.
So, he sort of argues and he says, okay, maybe Twitter's just got to take a step back and sort of say, what the hell are we?
Right.
What are we really?
Right.
And to me, Twitter has really always been a utility.
I agree with that.
It's just been running water, right?
Yeah.
It's just been this sort of transcription lifeline of the world. There's a whole lot of crap on it.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of ads. There's a whole lot of spam. There's a whole lot of junk. There's a whole lot of bots and whatnot on there. But, I mean, you look at news coverage now and how often are tweets cited? How often?
Yeah. All the time.
That is the modern press release.
I mean, when you think that presidential candidates are using Twitter to get their message out or to attack other candidates or other people, even in some cases, that's remarkable.
Yeah, for sure.
It's the new wire. It's
a wire,
and that's really what it is. And hindsight's 2020. You look back at Facebook when it was a thing, and you could say like, oh, they're gonna make money off this. Like they'll figure this out. This is just like a shared interest sort of thing.
Right.
Google, people are searching for stuff. We can sell that.
Yeah.
There's value in that information, in that data. But with Twitter, it's like, oh no, this is just people sort of expressing and reporting, and it's basically the real world, real life, just getting written down.
But why? So Facebook has been able, like we used to sort of like maybe about 2 years ago or 3 years ago when Facebook was like, I'm getting into mobile, people were like, ha 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 ha, like that's so hard to do and you're not that. But they have clearly proven that that's where they're moving.
Yeah.
So why has Twitter struggled then? I mean, if Facebook has been able to reinvent themselves, I mean, I don't think that, yes, we all know that like Facebook is not what it was, 5, 6, 7 years ago, but this messenger app, that's where they're making all their money.
Yeah, I mean, I think they just have an easier path to being lucrative. I just think there's enough sort of personalized advertising, personalized sort of messaging that they're able to harness.
There's so much cruft on Facebook that people infuriate people, like they hate it. Like, oh, why am I seeing all this sponsored stuff?
Right.
Or why am I seeing all these recommended stories? And then all of that stuff is obviously built on your likes and dislikes and all that stuff. And none of that exists on Twitter.
Right. It's much more surface level.
It's very surface level.
They tried with Moments, but that's not.
It's just not.
I'd never click on that.
What's funny is like Moments is just basically like kind of the front page.
Right.
Which is essentially reinforcing their sense of utility.
Right.
But it was
like,
always
a source.
Very
Like,
text-based.
So what do
you
you mean like a HuffPo where there's just like so much stuff on there that you're.
To me, Moments is like the stuff that's trending that's not crap.
Right.
That's not
curated,
about freaking One Direction or whatever. That they're like, oh, this is an important moment.
Right.
Sometimes it's Kanye, sometimes it's whatever. But, I guess, obviously that's curated to some degree.
Yeah.
But yeah, I that's what I sort of think. I don't think they're saying, oh, Moments is the way to, really becoming this mega powerhouse, money-making operation.
So do they think then that rearranging my timeline is the way to do it?
Well, and that's part of the news this week.
I think what they want to do, you were saying, there's as you were saying, they organize this new news feed where these most important tweets are at the top, right? Mm-hmm. Essentially, they've reorganized it. And I guess the logic is that they want to create more engagement. So they want all these people that are using it that aren't just browsing. They're not just looking at. They pick the things that people are actually going to like reply to and share and all that stuff.
And just by what we've been conditioned to understand about how the internet makes money, is that like the beginning of the path to be like, okay, well, this is like much more focused. Right. So now that's more valuable, and we can potentially like intercept that and sell that.
Right.
And I guess that's the thinking. So they're flirting with sort of rearranging your timeline. Mm-hmm. There was a story I sort of skimmed over about verified users getting a more different sort of timeline layout than maybe someone who isn't, which I thought was like,
okay,
I'm cool with that. I'm verified.
Yeah. So that would be interesting. Actually.
Which is weird too, because it's like, when the whole verified thing, which is still like this baffling behind closed doors, like how does that work? Yeah. Like I remember when we had it at CNET, there was just like an email that went around. It was like, "Hey, somebody knows a guy at Twitter. Yeah. you guys want blue check marks next to your name?
Yeah.
Is that like cool? You want that?" We're like, "Yeah, I want that.
Yeah,
sign me up." And that was it. I was like, so I know that process has become a little more regulated and official.
A little bit, yeah.
But yeah, it's a weird time for this company. I think.
But that being said, could you get through your day without Twitter? How many times a day do you check
Twitter
it?
is the only social network that I am constantly glued to because it's great.
Yeah.
And you know what? There's a lot of interaction. It's the only real social network that I am super I love to reciprocate on Twitter. That's my thing.
Yeah.
Maybe I feed the trolls a little bit. Maybe I eat whatever's out there. Maybe I shouldn't do that. But for whatever reason,
You do feed I
don't feed them. Let me back that a little bit. I don't say I feed them, but like if someone comes out and says something directly to me, I'll likely have a wise ass remark right back at it because it's effortless.
Yeah.
There's no time. It's just
Right.
like bam. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I think for me it's a little harder because we're on the air and there's an association with that. So I don't feed the trolls. My thing is, what I have never figured out about Twitter is like, and even my girlfriend who works, she used to work at ProPublica. She works at Last Week Tonight with John Oliver now. She's always like, you don't have to thank everybody, or you don't have to like. She's like, that's too spammy. You're like spamming my like. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Isn't that what reciprocation is all about? Like somebody's like, hey, dude, I like that piece. And you're like, oh, thanks, man.
And she would only see those thanks if she follows those people as well.
Right. Yeah.
So whatever.
I don't know.
I think it's nice to thank people on Twitter. I think that it's so frequent that negativity just spawns out of these realms where it's just like trolls and awful people. When people say nice things.
You just want to acknowledge it and be like, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. And how
Give
many
them a
times have you like
say thank you,
acknowledged something like that, and then gotten something back where it's like, oh man, that's so awesome.
Not only that,
that's very.
I've
satisfying.
also gotten like trolly messages, and I've responded to them in like a very earnest, like, really, that's not cool, dude. And then the most like apologetic, like, I don't know what was wrong with me that day. I was just feeling weird.
Yeah,
it's that epiphany, like, oh,
this is a human being on the other side.
That's a great point. Like, because it's the same thing, sort of like the same concept on my public Facebook page. People will like comment to me and say, hey, like, I didn't really like what you said about this.
Yeah,
and I'll say, oh, I'm sorry. Like, let's have a conversation about it.
Right.
And then they always go, oh, I didn't mean to sound like a a-hole or something. I just wanted to, voice my opinion. I'm like, that's totally fine, and I'm happy to, understand what you're talking about, and like, let me tell you where our sources are, or what our reporting tells us. And then I just think that that's okay. I think generally it's like when people respond like in an angry fashion, or they respond trolly back, that people then go, oh, and then it becomes like the Twitter mob,
or subtweeting,
and
or
so
all that stuff.
That situation that we're constantly describing is like, it's sort of like this does not compute thing that happens in people's heads where it's like, oh, there's this anonymity on the internet that I'm sort of protected by. Oh, wait a minute. Real life people on the other end of this, they do this about face.
Right.
And it's like, my bad.
Right.
You're probably a nice guy.
Right.
You probably have like a family and everything's cool. Like, it was a rough day. A lot of traffic on the turnpike. So that is definitely a thing. We'll continue to watch Twitter and see just what the hell that company is going to do. I love it though, because Twitter's not going anywhere.
No,
no one has to worry about that. Will they constantly be doing like internal, restructuring until the end of the time?
They'll get to a point of like steady, good profitability. It's probably not as big as the company is right now, but they'll get there.
Yeah, and like I said, it's the only one I like.
Yeah. I mean, I do. I'm on Snapchat and I do some of the other things, but I mean, I find it very useful. When I was a good example is when I was in West Africa. A lot of the tips that we would get that we would obviously check out, but people would say, "Hey, Vlad, I'm in this village and this is what's going on." Boko Haram exploded a bomb. I see this, I see that, and we could say, "Wow, we got to get down there." And it was very, very useful in that sense. I don't know. You're talking about in the U.S. versus like in some of the emerging markets where they use it on a regular basis. Like Nigeria is super connected to like the social media and wired. They are very wired in. So it's helpful.
It's an invaluable tool and. That's why I think it's the most important social network, if that's a thing you can say about social networks. Okay, I want to get really out there, kind of nerdy space stuff. Real big space discovery.
Yeah.
So have you heard about this?
Yeah, dude. They discovered the gravitational waves, that Einstein's theory that was like in his general theory of relativity is like actually provable. They've heard sound.
They're like, he was right.
He was right.
This is confirmed.
Yes.
We have sensitive enough instruments now that can detect the ever pulsating gravitational force. We can measure that. We can sniff that out of the universe now. And I'm like, okay, that sounds awesome on paper.
Right.
I'm like, what the hell does
that
it mean?
Yeah.
So I went right to Reddit, which is
perfect spot to go. Yeah.
Source,
which is a great source for stuff to kind of explain stuff to me, like I'm 5 years old, which is a fantastic subreddit that we constantly frequent. And the highest voted comment sort of breaks it down. And obviously, you know, when you're on Reddit, you got to take everything with maybe a grain of salt and sort of say, okay, well, this is one explanation. And this has been the easiest thing that I've been able to digest.
Yeah.
So if you're really sort of trying to wrap your head around just what the hell these discovery of gravitational waves means, here is the
I already knew.
You knew?
You knew that?
Yeah, I'm
okay.
a
Okay,
genius.
Russ.
It's fine.
Explain it like I'm 5.
Okay, so there's like milk,
There's milk?
and then someone pours some chocolate milk in the center of the normal milk,
Yeah.
and it creates a real big mess. And then it falls off the edge,
What edge?
the Earth's edge, because the Earth is flat.
Oh,
as we
okay.
know.
Okay.
And then it's pouring off the edge, and
Okay,
the turtles are
B.O.B..
down there carrying the Earth around.
Wrong. That's not how that works.
So we had Derek Pitts, who is an astronomer, on CBSN the other day. And we kept hammering that. We kept asking, but explain it to us like we're 5. Well, now try it for 3.
Yeah.
Like we kept like make it even.
Use pictures. Here's some crayons. You draw that.
Right. And at the end, he said, which made a lot of sense to me. He said, so Einstein posited that there were these, or actually knew that there were these gravitational waves. And as far as a practical application, well, it will allow scientists to know more about how the universe was created. Mm-hmm. Number 1. Number 2, more about the physical world that we live in, our planet and its solar system, and what that means, and where it is today, and how these atoms came together to create this planet and our humanity, and finally, where it can be expected to go into the future. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay, like that makes sense, because, you know, people were saying it's like Alexander Graham Bell, like, and, you know, Watson come here kind of a thing, kind of a discovery. But I was saying to Derek, I think for a lot of people, you can understand that. You're talking to somebody in New York and they're in Atlanta.
Right.
Sure.
That makes sense. But like, what does this mean for us?
Right. It's tough to find a sort of practical application where it's like, and I think a lot of this also sort of says to the fact that like, oh, we're pretty smart.
Right.
Like, you know, obviously we're the smartest we've ever been. Right.
We think.
We
right?
think. Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe we shouldn't watch everything on TV. But yeah, like, we've come a real long way. And, you know, a lot of the world is educated to the point where like, we kind of understand what that means. People want to see like some sort of direct result, likely in a product or something, where it's like, oh man, you mean I can do X, Y, Z? Well, no, that's not how like discoveries always work. So I think that's a tough thing to explain to somebody who doesn't necessarily have an interest or a sort of background in science and that sort of thing. But it's definitely important.
But, you know, it's funny. One of the things that I also asked Derek is why, and it's kind of a stupid question, but it's like, again, I always ask like questions that I think our audience, people like want to ask and like maybe are afraid to ask, because it's almost like, you know, when people say, well, why has there only been one Mozart? Well, there have been people who have been as talented as Mozart or Beethoven or, you know, any one of the great classical composers. But, you know, the idea that they exist in their own realm and that they're so above everybody else. And I said the difference between like why is there only a Mozart and a Beethoven is that that's musical talent, which is innate, and like, you know, creativity wise, who knows what's going on there.
Right.
But Einstein is math.
Right.
And the thing that I've always been told since you're a little kid, right, is like, who cares how creative you are if you don't know how to add? You can't do anything.
Yeah.
Like you can, you know. And so why haven't there been people that have been able to say, even 20 or 30 years after Einstein put this out, yeah, I agree. And because here my own calculations coincide with his.
Sure.
And that's weird, isn't it? That it's taken 100 years for people to go, oh, yeah, he was right.
Well, I don't know if
this was proof, though. Is the devices that they invented were strong enough to determine these things. It wasn't so much math as it was obviously the math drives the technology, but the technology got so sensitive and so accurate that they could see these waves and determine this data. But it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to pull a notepad out and just like,
add that up. And I don't think people were necessarily sort of like fighting Einstein on this.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone was. I'm sure there were people
because on Twitter, like his official tweet, did you see that?
No, I didn't see
it.
Oh,
dude, his official tweet, like the Einstein, the people,
estate or
whatever, like tweeted mic drop.
Oh, really? That's amazing.
Yeah, they like literally tweeted like, haters, boom.
Yeah,
like,
what's up? Now what? I got 13 more in my back pocket.
Right. So clearly they were like, yeah, everybody, maybe not that they didn't believe
Einstein. But that it was unprovable.
Right.
And with that unprovability comes this sort of like mysterious, like, that's nice.
Yeah, maybe
that's nice.
That's what he said,
right? But I would has Neil deGrasse Tyson like been vocal about? I haven't heard his take on it because I'm
generally
sure
pretty opinionated.
He's pretty opinionated, but I'm sure I don't think he's like, oh, I was wrong about it. Like I'm sure he was like, yeah,
right,
boy, like had that exactly right. Which think about the it hasn't been that long in the grand scheme of things, but think about like since he posited that like. What we've done, and it took that long for us to invent something.
That is kind of mind blowing too. That we could use the general theory of relativity to figure out how to get a man to the moon.
Yeah,
but we haven't been able to detect these sounds.
We just sort of had to believe in it.
Yeah, you had to sort of believe in that.
Believe it would work.
That's kind of what I think is mind blowing.
And the fact that he was able to do it with the technologically stunted world that he was in. Not that it was stunted, but compared to nowadays is like night and day.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
That's just one of those.
It's cool, man.
It's sort of like being, I guess, if you're, if you could be Galileo and say, I've never been out there. Yeah. But here's what I think, and then like 100 years or 200 years later, people go, "Holy smokes!"
Man,
or evolution.
Yeah,
and he did that
exactly. And he did that with like a protractor and a telescope.
That is so. I know we're using our smartphone.
Right.
So have you guys not heard this theory that like? You made an interesting point that we're like as smart as we've ever been, but there are some people who are now saying that. The internet is actually because we have this wealth of information.
I think we did a story
did we talk
on
about
CBS about
like that we have all this info that we're actually getting dumber because when you only had a protractor and a telescope, you really had to calculate things out to be sure.
Right.
Whereas now you can just like Google it and it's somebody else's calculations that you're basing your knowledge. You're not reading a book or you're not.
And I guess you're not as focused as you once were. You might, if you only were studying this one topic and you were so focused, you didn't have Reddit with its cat gifts to distract you from like your goals as a scientist. And now you're just like, oh, I can read about this and I can read about this, and you're all over the place.
The argument is that we don't retain anything.
Yes.
And the argument, but so like I understand that, and here's where I'll get like a little heady with you, right?
Okay.
Yes, we don't retain that, but the internet is essentially like a second brain. Do you understand what I'm saying? Where it's like you don't need to retain that because you don't. That information only needs to be accessible when you need it. So like yes, if you were able to download Wikipedia into your brain, you would just like have that style. Information.
That would be awesome.
Sure, and maybe we're not that far away from something like that. But again, it's like Russ, you're looking at me like I'm such a piece of garbage. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think like because you can remember something that makes you smarter. Again. Like you do have to have cognitive ability to understand the information you're looking up.
True.
And you can't just be like, oh, the answer's 830. Shut up.
Right.
There needs to be
the question is, are people doing that? And so that I think is, all right, I buy that. I buy that.
Or at least buy the idea that this could sort of be how we're evolving as a species.
Yeah. On the other hand, like if you believe in the all-encompassing power of the internet as your go-to for almost anything. And that's what it is for a lot of people, and myself included, but that you never ever decide to go deeper than what it is that you're like Googling or whatever. That to me can be a problem.
Yeah. Of course.
Because then you could have people like in the future running for office who've never studied anything about politics, political history, American history, world history, but all the information they have is from Twitter and from Google and from all these other things, and they can pass off a good game.
Totally. And I love that you brought that up because, what was it, 2 weeks ago, last week, we were talking about how there's a generation of people that just don't care. It was mostly about politicians, but it was how people, the truth doesn't matter.
Right.
And I think that comes into that conversation about, is the internet making us stupider? Because there's all these shortcuts.
People don't care about the source. They just care about the end result. But obviously, the end result is determined by the source.
Exactly.
I can actually take that and add another sort of metaphor to that, and also plug CBS, which is we're having the Grammys on CBS on Monday. But we were talking about music and all these artists that have been nominated for Grammys, and here's the discussion that I always have. I think sometimes it feels with younger people, but so you like Meghan Trainor,
okay,
or you like Adele. And they're amazing artists, and there's nothing wrong with liking them. They put out incredible music, and they're incredibly talented. But for me, the way I've always been, and part of like what has fueled my desire to be a journalist and to meet people and to talk to people is, well, if I hear a song like All About That Bass and I hear that hook and I think to myself, well, that's really cool and it's really interesting. Where did that come from? So then I can say, well, Benny King was doing that when he was with the Drifters, and where did that come from? And so the curiosity that takes me beyond just what's like right in front of me, Meghan Trainor or the internet, whatever it is what drives me to then say, okay, now I have a little bit of an understanding. Yeah, Meghan Trainor's amazing. I'm not going to diss her and say she's derivative. All music is at some level, but I can say I've got an active interest in understanding like why that music is so catchy to our ears today.
Sure.
Well, because it's always been, because people have been writing stuff like this for 30 or 40 years. I don't know though. I sometimes feel like that's the nerd part of me that even my sister would argue is like makes me a nerd, is that like nobody cares why. We just like Meghan Trainor, and that's what we.
Well, and that's sort of the thing, and I'm sure you're aware, having that connection to John Oliver's show, that conversation that he has with Edward Snowden, which is, this is a very important topic. You're exposing all of this stuff that the government's spying on us. But the way it's delivered is delivered in the form of essentially vegetables. It's like a very like stoic, downer way.
Unappetizing.
And John Oliver's like, well, say they're sharing your dick pics. And people will care.
Right.
And that was like the perfect encapsulation of this idea, which is you need to not present it as vegetables. You need to present it in a way that's digestible and interesting and true, but also in a way that relates to people. So that's the real challenge.
Which is this inherently tragic thing to deliberate in internally, right? Where it's like it's almost like how does all that static just lower and just information come back to reality? Because we're in a situation right now where there's just really too much to distract. Like we're losing cars,
right?
Like we're not allowed to drive those anymore, because we can't be held responsible.
For driving.
Like they're too dangerous now. Like that's getting taken away from us.
I know.
So I don't know. I struggle a lot with that. It's a really fun conversation to have, though. But it's.
I love how we got there from the acoustical equipment that can detect these gravitational
that's it.
Now, dude, like
the next thing Einstein posited was all about the rise and fall of Twitter.
You'll
see.
We'll
it's like you turn the page on gravitational ripples. And it's like, oh shit, oh my god, how do you know about Jack Dorsey? That's crazy. It's crazy. So we'll put up the link to that. Explain It Like I'm Five in the show notes. We're gonna shift gears just a little bit. I know you're a big comic book guy.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
Are you looking forward to the Deadpool movie?
Dude, I'm so looking forward to this because when I first heard that they were making a Deadpool movie, I was like, if it's like the Wolverine Origins Deadpool, right?
Yes.
Which Ryan Reynolds actually played that Deadpool too. I was like, then it's gonna be so lame.
Yeah.
And then I was also I was kind of bummed that Ryan Reynolds, because I hated the Green Lantern movie.
Yeah. So did he. Like, it's very obvious.
Right?
It's very obvious.
And so I'm like, But everything I've seen, I haven't seen it yet. I'm dying to see it. It looks good. Deadpool's been one of my favorite like mutant characters going back to like X Factor, like back in the old days,
Sure.
And so I think he's super interesting. I think that the idea that even in the comic books that he's kind of aware that he's like a comic book character and is kind of cool. And so I don't know. Have you seen it?
I saw it.
So Russ has seen it.
I saw it last week. I actually mentioned it on the podcast last week, but I couldn't talk about it because it wasn't under embargo until last weekend. We can talk about it now.
Spoiler free, obviously.
Spoiler free.
Yeah.
I thought it was excellent.
Really?
So you're going to use the word excellent.
Without a doubt. I was trying to think of like a superhero movie I liked more. I think I had to go back to The Dark Knight.
Wow, that far.
I like Dark Knight more. I like Dark Knight more.
Right.
But I would say since Dark Knight, I liked it more than Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay.
Really?
I think.
See, but that's okay. I'm okay with that because Guardians of the Galaxy.
Is it a superhero movie though? Kind of.
Yeah. I think
or is it just like a space comedy?
It's a superhero. I mean, there's they have superpowers. Come
I
on.
understand, but Guardians of the Galaxy was a comic book movie. That nobody knew any. Like I didn't know any of those characters before that.
Well, I would say for Deadpool, that's the case for a lot of people as well. I knew the basic, but I was not a huge.
I mean, Deadpool's like a 30-year-old.
It's been around since. I think it's been around since
maybe more
90, 91. So that's funny. Deadpool, Deadpool. I know how I know this because 91 is when I graduated from college, and that's when I started. I mean, I'm still a huge comic book fan, but I stopped collecting like monthly and weekly. I stopped like the actual collecting, and it became more of like graphic novels and kind of things. But Deadpool was like one of those last characters that was introduced, and I remember going like, "This is pretty cool." And the guy who was like the artist on it, Liefeld, I think, he went on to
Rob Liefeld.
Rob Liefeld, right? Yep. He went on to do Image Comics, and what's funny about like the character is it's something that Alex Ross has not been happy with, that he creates characters that have like all these weapons and all these kind of crazy things, but I always thought that was awesome. I always thought that was like, when you're a kid, you're like, what? Like, if he can have more katanas,
right?
That's just an amazing.
Bring it on,
dude. So.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the movie in general like is very true to the nature of the character, which is like a very silly, very upbeat, light character. He breaks the fourth wall consistently throughout the movie. That's like, and it feels very honest, even from the opening credits, which I won't ruin.
Right.
But they're fantastic. The first 10 minutes of the movie are like perfect. There's some origin story stuff that I think gets a little more serious and is important from character building standpoint. It's not as laugh out loud funny as the core Deadpool moments, of which there are very many.
Sure.
Is there any love story in it?
So his relationship with his girlfriend is sort of the cohesive source of the movie. And again, I don't know how that relates to the comics and his storyline in the comics. But she comes off as a very good companion to him, which is to say, like, it's not like a typical, like, romance, cheesy, like, I love her, Mary Jane type Spider-Man situation.
And that's kind of what turned me off about Ant-Man. I know I'm late to the party on that movie.
You were turned off by Ant-Man? I don't think we talked about it.
We didn't, because I just saw it like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, very
and I liked it, but man, and my wife, my wife is not a gigantic comic book.
Yeah.
She enjoys like the Batman stuff, but she gets very turned off by the Hollywood lines. And there are a lot of Hollywood lines in Ant-Man.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, dude, your daughter. Dude, your daughter is in there, man. And if you don't become an ant,
right?
If you don't become an ant right now, your daughter, she's just gonna realize how much of a loser you are. You're never gonna freaking see her again, man.
Right.
And
it's like the cliche of like the hero's journey.
Me crazy.
Right.
And I think Deadpool leans into that and mocks it mercilessly.
Because that's what you're looking for.
I don't know. I saw this in a review that there's a reference to Green Lantern in it.
So I remember seeing that like last year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was maybe like a Comic-Con trailer or something like that, and I got upset because I was like, man, I would love to seen that organically.
Yeah.
But
there's a reference to Green Lantern. There's a reference to the Wolverine Origins Deadpool.
Oh, really?
In the movie. That's great.
But it's so clear, like, I mean, how unhappy they were with Deadpool's original origin. And it's clear how much Ryan Reynolds was involved, like, in making sure this happened, like, campaigning for it, working for, I mean, it was...
I'm surprised that he would want to do another, like, superhero movie. Like, it'd be like Christian Bale saying, like, I want to play...
well, not quite, because Christian Bale had a successful comic book movie.
Right, whereas Ryan Reynolds had this awful Green Lantern experience.
And then an awful Deadpool experience. So it was like, you have these, but you could tell, like, he has a passion for the subject matter, and some of that might be just, like, career-driven, but also it just seems like he's into the character. So
right, and the big questions I want to know is, like, okay, when you were X-Men Origins Deadpool...
Yeah.
Like, how much about Deadpool did you know?
Right. Did you know?
Sure.
You personally,
I don't know.
And look, I'm not. You're an actor. That's fine. So, like, the fact that it was able to embrace that.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is all driven a lot too. You have to consider the fact that there was this when that Deadpool test footage leaked out,
right?
Which was what, 2 years ago,
Yeah, 2
maybe?
years ago, yeah.
And the internet reaction to that, which is essentially how and why this film got made in the first place.
Yeah.
Obviously, if I'm Ryan, I'm like, oh man,
right.
And I don't want to take anything away from him. Maybe he all along was like pioneering, like, no, he screwed Deadpool.
Right.
What we have to make this right.
Right.
I think it's amazing that this all sort of like came into place, and that's what I'm mostly fascinated by.
Sure.
I'm fascinated now about movies that get made that have no right getting made.
Yeah.
Playing in line with the regular studio behavior, like a movie like Mad Max,
right.
which is like this amazing $200 million movie that should never have gotten by any standard sort of like operating procedure that studios usually follow.
Yeah.
What is that movie getting
Or
made?
even like a movie like Pitch Perfect.
Yeah.
Well,
seriously.
see, okay, so
I think that falls in the same category.
Sure, yes.
Well, I kind of agree with that, but I wonder if there's a movement now in Hollywood and it becomes like a Hollywood thing in itself, which is, we're getting traction now with these characters that nobody's ever heard of.
Yeah.
And so there isn't that built-in like expectation, because if you screw around with Batman or Superman or whatever, like there's this whole thing like with Ben Affleck playing Batman, right?
Sure.
And like, give the guy a chance. He's a great actor. I haven't seen the flick yet, so I'm gonna say it'll be fine unless it totally sucks, and then I'll say it sucks.
I think if it sucks, it'll have nothing to do with Ben Affleck sucking.
Exactly. So I wonder now if it's like, let's find these under the radar like Doctor Strange, dude. Like even when I was in my height of like comic book geekdom, Doctor Strange was not
way low on that.
Way, I was not.
So
it was like the one that you wanted to trade away for. You'd be like, I'll give you like 4 Doctor Strange for like that one like bad Hulk comic.
And then you're like, you're making a movie?
I know.
But Iron Man was that character too. Like for years, he was big, but like not mainstream. He wasn't Spider-Man. He wasn't like.
But Robert Downey Jr. also injected something into Tony Stark that I'm not sure Tony Stark.
Oh, you don't think he had that before?
No, and I was actually an Iron Man fan, and I had like, and remember, you guys, you close to my age, but not. There was when I was growing up in the early '70s, and it was actually these were comics or cartoons that were made in the '60s.
Yeah,
were these like almost like stop motion cartoons of Iron Man, Thor, all the heroes that are now like the Avengers, basically. Sure. And they used to have that. It was like Tony Stark made of steel, right? And Iron Man, and it was like this incredible, like awesome cartoon. And I became an Iron Man fan, and the Hulk was part of it. And so I've always been an Iron Man fan. Tony Stark was not Robert Downey Jr. at all. He was like,
he wasn't cocky.
Think about this. I could be wrong, and if Stan Lee were here, he'd be like, "You're totally lying." But I always thought that Tony Stark was like Marvel's attempt at like Bruce Wayne. And like it's like Batman like
who just bought his way into
he like it's like it's like Batman is all about his gadgets. And in that version when Iron Man came out in the 60s, Batman was in its campy phase, and Batman had all these gadgets. So they're just like, well, let's just take it to the next level and just make the whole suit like a gadget, and then have him be a billionaire kind of a dude.
Right.
And I always thought he was a poor man's Bruce Wayne with a mustache.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely the Marvel equal of what DC was doing with that sort of character.
So,
I don't know. It's tough. It's
but see, you not liking Ant-Man, it makes me wonder, like, if it's because
I didn't dislike Ant-Man.
Right.
I just was like, okay.
Because now it feels like they're going to take these characters. I don't even know if, I guess I'll go see a Doctor Strange movie, but
Benedict Cumberbatch, come on.
I know.
That could be a lot of fun. I think it's good that all these characters, these smaller characters, don't have as much baggage. Even though I think Deadpool nails it.
Right.
I think it's good that there's more room for these actors to work. I mean, that is why Iron Man was such a huge thing, was because of Robert Downey Jr. Making it his own.
He made it his
own. But that's
so,
Hollywood line, dude.
Of course. Right. But I think... So there's a lot of that. I think Robert Downey Jr. is able to sort of sometimes transcend some of that with his shtick.
Yeah.
Whereas...
Like, I don't think you can do that with Batman. I don't think you can do that with Superman.
So that's a big question. So have you guys seen that documentary? It's called like The Death of Superman Lives. It's this like indie doc done by this dude who wanted to know why the Kevin Smith first pen draft of Superman Lives, as produced by John Peters with Nicolas Cage.
Oh, that was the Burton
Superman, the Burton one.
The test, by the way, go search YouTube right now and look at Cage in a Superman costume.
Right. And they actually, in the movie, in the doc, they have like the actual, so you've seen the pictures, but there's video of him in it.
With Tim Burton, like in the room.
In the room, yeah. So what did you think?
I mean, what he looked like?
Like, would you have bought it? Would you have been like, yeah, dude, Tim Burton's this was like, oh man, I can't remember what it was after Batman and Robin, which was the Clooney one. So that would have been like in the late 97, 98, late 90s,
like,
right?
Oh, yeah. Lois, like that kind of thing. Like, oh, we got to get back to Metropolis. I don't know, man. Like, it's just Cage as Superman is just absurd to me.
To your point, Ross, is there too much? Are the fans so like attached to their characters that you can't see beyond a visionary director like Tim Burton, who's always done? You may not like all of his movies, but they're always like thought-provoking and interesting, and they're shot interestingly well. And so, or people just like, dude, it's got to be the curly Q. It's got to be.
I don't think it's the fans as much as it is on the studio side. When you have such a massive, expensive property like a Superman, like a Batman that exists, and it has been in the public consciousness for a while now, there are, I think, limits to the amount of risks they're willing to take.
Have you heard the stories like Kevin Smith talks about when he goes and he pitches to John Peters, who produced the first Batman? Have you heard some of those things? So he goes, to your point, he goes, I write the script, and Kevin Smith's a much better like talker than I am, but he goes into John Peters' house, and the first thing he says that Peter says is, dude, your script's cool. One thing, all right, Superman, lose the cape. He's like, what? And he goes, yeah, like, he's like, F that. The cape is corny. Like, who walks around with a cape? It's so stupid. And then he's like, all right, I got one more note for you. He can't fly. Oh. And so Kevin's like, well, that's a problem. That makes him like, it's all these things. And then he goes, finally, the Fortress of Solitude, can Superman have like guards there? And he's like, and the way Kevin Smith tells it, he's like, well, but he's like Superman. Why doesn't he need guards?
He's the best.
And it's like, so there you see like Hollywood gerrymandering with like a character, but in a way, you can almost see what Peters was trying to do. It's like, hey, let's take him out of the way people expect him to be and turn him into something that he.
And Dark Knight and Batman was certainly that.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's why I have such an affinity for those films, save for the Schumacher one.
Right.
No one had seen. I think the Tim Burton films are great.
They're still my favorite.
But very different.
Really? Over the Nolan?
They're different.
Yeah.
I think for me, the 89 Batman was the first exposure I had. Although even, and you're going to laugh at this, but this was my generation, like that live action Ninja Turtles movie, like that really
that
dark
first one?
The dark one that was basically like underground the entire.
Raphael's like in a coma for half.
That movie's like very real and like surprise, and like for a 7-year-old to see like Ninja Turtles as live action
it's legit. I
was
remember.
insane. But for Batman, it was the first sort of like, this is real.
Yeah.
Whereas other sort of superhero movies lose that illusion.
I agree. It made you. When I was a kid, the Donner Superman came out. Superman with Christopher Reeve.
Yeah.
And I remember the tagline being, "It will make you believe a man can fly."
Right.
And I felt that certainly as a kid. I was 7 when that movie came out. But when Batman came out, I actually thought like, this dude is like lives in the neighborhood.
Like I could bump into him. I could see him maybe in the sky or something like that.
Yeah.
And I still watch it every now and then, and it's it's aged
a
little bit.
Now, yeah.
There's a lot of like micro modeling in that movie, which I still love.
Right.
It's like, but it's it's aging a little bit. I still think it holds up.
Yeah.
But there's something about that specific character, and I think what we're discovering is that this phenomenon varies by character.
Right.
Where Batman, because Batman has no inherent superpowers besides like unlimited money,
right,
and super intelligence, I guess you could sort of say, and him being trained by Ra's al Ghul and all this stuff.
Right.
You sort of have to just suspend your disbelief a little bit and say, hey, okay, he's still a person. He's still of this earth. He can be killed.
Yeah.
But his struggles are real, and I can relate with that because he doesn't have like special DNA or anything.
Which is which the appeal of Batman, who's my favorite superhero character of all time, has always been, right? Which is that like it's just like his brain. Yeah, he's got money, but it's his brain, his brawn. And one of the things I don't know where I read this, but somebody said, never forget, like he's like the world's greatest detective. That's like the thing. He's like a detective.
It's funny that's enforced in all the video games now.
Yeah.
Where like you have to, like you're the
Arkham,
detective. You need to like scope out this scene and understand.
And
like,
Ra's al Ghul always called him a detective.
Right.
Yeah, detective.
That's what you said.
Exactly.
Hello, detective.
Yeah. I think that's kind of interesting. I want you to one day go and show your kid that Ninja Turtles movie.
Oh yeah.
And because I showed my nephews, like one day, like Superman, the Donner Superman was on, and my nephews they at the time they were like 8 and 5. And I was like, oh my God, this is coming on. We got to watch this. And they're like, oh, Superman, that's kind of cool.
Right.
And we're watching, and the 8-year-old's like, this is so cheesy.
It's like, what is this crap?
And I'm like,
that's
this
not
is
Niagara
awesome.
Falls.
And of course, right. And I was watching it too. And I'm like, oh, the color chrome is wrong. It's like.
Yeah, like there was a point of no return in filmmaking, I think, where like stuff just looked weird.
So bad.
You know?
But I'll take that one over the Singer version any
day,
dude.
Those just aren't good. Me personally, I don't like Superman at all. Like
really, you're one of those.
Yeah,
you just think
lame.
that like
he's just lame. He's not a loser.
He's flat.
What?
He's flat.
What?
He's not.
You're like Bruce Wayne. You think that like
Batman's
Clark,
my favorite.
right? I know. You think that Clark, like you want to be able to be like Clark, you're a Boy Scout. Like kind of a thing. Like
it's not interesting. Like he needs to he needs to do.
But
weird
nobody
stuff.
wants emo Superman like the.
No, I don't want emo.
Way.
I want him to be kind of a dick.
Well,
right?
You mean using
in sometimes in comic books he could be a dick.
Sure.
And I kind of like wish that the Batman vs Superman like played into that. Maybe they do. I have zero expectation for that movie, but I just think like if you just start with the surface. Okay, he's a superhero. What's his power? Everything.
He has every power.
What do you mean? Can he fly? Yeah. Can he can actually move at the speed of light?
Right.
Yeah.
That's his super. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And they've
So why is anything ever a problem?
And the problem is that's exactly it. Is they've never figured out a way to make, at least in the movies. I'm sure in the comics there's been really good ones. I know Red Sun is like a great spinoff.
Yes.
But in the movies, they've never figured out a way to give him real conflict, short of taking his powers away.
No, and it's right. That's
that's the best movie, right?
I think what DC has realized, one, is that that makes for a more interesting character, and it can't be. The reality is, it's to diminish his power. But interestingly enough, the history of Superman is that when he was first created, he couldn't fly at the speed of sound. He could only leap tall buildings in a single bound, or an eighth of a mile. And it was a struggle for him to like stop a train.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You'd have to like take a breather,
right? Take a little. Oh man, that was tough.
I need some sun.
Then when it became that he could move a planet, and the only thing that DC has ever said is that he's fast, but he's not as fast as the Flash. Well, what the hell?
It's like, come on.
It's pretty close.
There's limiting things with that. I think going back to Deadpool, I think it's amazing that this movie got made. They didn't make it for a lot.
No, I don't know what the budget
50,
was,
right?
but under 50.
Under 50 million,
Which sounds,
it's cheap.
Which is relatively cheap.
They've got no actors.
Movie,
Ryan Reynolds is not asking for a lot of money, I'm sure.
No.
And they don't rely on a lot of CG. There's like amazingly good action scenes. You know what it felt like? The action in particular felt like Dredd. If either of you have seen Dredd, the new one.
No.
Excellent. It's on Netflix. Highly recommend it. Not the Sly Stallone one, the one that came out a couple years ago.
But that one is
very
fun, right?
That one is pretty fun.
Rob Schneider.
It is
Rob Schneider. I am the law.
Yeah, Mr. I am the law.
Deadpool just feel like the action's really good, and even more impressive, it's a funny comedy, and those are two very difficult things to pull off.
Yeah.
And it's a hard R, like no question about it. It's at an R. I just saw online it made like a record amount of money on Thursday, and it's probably going to make over $100 million.
The sequel's coming.
The sequel's definitely happening. So that's something to like work. So they're saying a Hollywood Reporter is saying that it potentially could make $90 million.
Wow.
That's kind of amazing.
It's crazy
huge,
for this type of movie.
And it has no competition. Like there's no anything,
and that's huge too,
coming out anywhere near it. So
what's its competition? Force Awakens.
I mean, Zoolander. I guess
Zoolander.
Which deep down I really want to see.
I want to see it too, because all of us, everybody, and probably everybody listening has like a deep nostalgia for Derek and Linus. But the reviews
and Hansel.
And Hansel. What do I call him?
Linus. Like a Peanuts thing. Like what's going on? But yeah, the reviews are terrible.
Yeah,
right?
it's Anchorman all over again.
Time out. No film can ever be as bad as the sequel to Anchorman.
But that's essentially the issue.
Yeah, Anchorman.
Because even the trailers didn't make me laugh. No. I'm laughing at some of the Zoolander stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No competition. So it steamrolls this weekend, I guess.
Yeah, I think it'll do really well. And I think it's great.
Which is great,
I think
because
it deserves to do well.
And the last thing I want to talk about is a video game that I want to explain to you and sort of get your take on. But like, to me, what the same thing that like popular indie games, what that does for the video game industry, even though Deadpool is not an indie film by any stretch,
right,
it is still a risk.
Yeah.
And it is still this sort of encouraging thing to studios to say, hey, we can make R-rated, dark comedy, action, superhero movies.
Right.
Like, we can do that. We can give people who normally wouldn't have the opportunity to direct and write stuff like this, we can maybe spend some money and take a few more chances, because we have a hit on our hands with this Deadpool guy that we all just learned about 6 months ago. So
I think it'll be really
so
really
this
good.
can happen now.
Yeah,
and
I'm excited. And
I
I think if they're not, if they do sequels and they're not burdened by having to do an origin story, I think it can only get better as it gets more and more outlandish with this character. Like, the character's so much fun that you could have him do crazy shit.
It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to finish off with one thing. Do you play a lot of games?
I do. Yeah.
So have you heard of the game Firewatch?
I have not.
So let me lay this on you, because this is a game unlike anything I've ever played. It's available right now for PlayStation 4 and PC. It is made by a small studio based in San Francisco called Campo Santo. And it's members of Telltale Games, who make the Walking Dead video games, and some other guys from other studios. So this is a game that is incredibly narratively driven.
Yep.
You are basically this guy who takes residence in a Firewatch tower in Yosemite National Park in 1989. Which is right around those, like, there was like big fires in that park during this time in American history. And you are alone in this tower, and your only sort of contact with the outside world is someone else on the other end of this walkie-talkie, and it's your boss, a woman named Delilah, and you have this interaction with her, and the story that this game tells just proceeds to happen to you as you're playing.
Wow.
And it is intense. There's a little bit of
makes it?
So this small indie developer called Campo Santo. And and I just want to bring it up because it is such a powerful game.
Is it a PC game?
It's on PC and PlayStation 4.
Okay.
So you can,
I don't have. I told you I don't have a PlayStation 4. I know people are going to be like, "Well, how can he be?" I am still on the Xbox One, the Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3.
So I
have a huge catalog of games I love.
So, but you have like a somewhat powerful Mac.
Yeah.
So you can play that on. You can
this
play this
game
on Mac.
On the Mac.
It is on Mac. I believe it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Or if it's not, it's coming very soon.
Okay.
It's not a difficult game.
No.
It is not a game. It's not real. Okay, I never want to say that it's not a game. It is certainly an interactive storytelling experience. But the story that this game tells, to me, is on par with some super high-end stuff that I've seen on like FX.
Yeah.
Or
really?
where it's just like who's the actor that plays
Rich Sommer is the actor, the lead guy. He was a character on Mad Men, if you watch Mad Men.
Yeah.
He played
was he Harry?
Harry.
Yeah,
thank
Harry
you,
Crane,
Harry.
Yeah.
There is dialogue in this game that feels so organic and so natural that it just kind of blew me away. Stacy watched every last minute of this game right next to me and was like, "Oh, we're going to play Firewatch tonight, right?" Like, it's a 5-hour game, maybe at most.
Yeah.
We got through it in about 3 sittings. And, you know, there's so many times where you just, like, look at each other and you're like, oh man,
you were playing this with your wife?
She was just watching. She was just watching me play.
It's fascinating.
It's
really
fascinating
and beautiful. Like it's set in this open world in. I don't think is it
Yosemite? Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah. Okay. So it's set in this open world and just gorgeous vistas. And so you'll just get a radio message say, hey, there's some kids down by the lake. You got to check it out. And you like go walk there and you're just seeing like beautiful stuff. And at one point you find a camera, just a junk disposable camera, and you can take photos. And apparently I found this out the other day. Yeah. You can actually order the photos that you take in the game and they'll mail them to your house.
What? So it's so cool.
In like a period authentic mailer. Like
so what's really cool is when they sent out the review codes for the game, they're like, hey, we want you to experience. We're going to send it to every editor, everyone that reviews the game, we're going to send it the photos to. And it's just like, man, that is such a, I've never seen that.
Right.
It is, to me, regardless of like, what you think about games, like this is, and I don't want to like trivialize it and water it down to the point of like, oh, you're buying the photo from the roller coaster.
No, but
but it's like these are the photos you took in the game with the camera in the game, and you get them in this like really cool sort of booklet when it comes in the mail, and anybody who plays the game on PC or I believe Mac can buy them. Can buy your own photos.
And your brain goes through this weird thing while you're playing the game when like the same thing that happens when you're on a hike and you're like, wow, that's a beautiful shot. I want to take a photo of that.
Yeah.
And you
actively
take it. It's just this weird confluence. It feels very like you're there. It feels very true.
All right, well, dude,
it's and this really game, awesome. The story
for the Mac.
Yeah, and the story this game tells keeps you guessing.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what is happening?
There's like a lost style mystery to it. You don't
there's
know what's going on.
There's these like variables and these things that you're constantly considering that happened to your character like an hour ago. And a lot of time passes, and I love how the game just sort of says like, nope, you fast forward, like bam, 3 weeks have gone by. It's day 50 now. Wow.
Yeah.
Just I love the transition, the way they sort of just handled the narrative sort of like exposition. They just take you along for this ride, and there's a payoff at the end, and you sort of have to like be at peace with what happened, and it's just great.
Really
and I have nothing but amazing stuff to say about it. There's a few things that are sort of left lingering where you're like, well, wait a second.
Right.
Some stuff happened, in the beginning. I want to know more about that. I want to find out what happened. But Firewatch just did it for me, and I haven't felt this way. And like we talk about every game we play, and this one just did it for me.
It really, I thought it was excellent. Definitely worth.
Well, I need to. So that's the one subject in this podcast that I don't, because I've never played it, but now I'm like, it's on my list.
So that was like my pitch to you. So
yeah,
you want to play this.
Like now I totally want to play it.
It's 3 hours, and I think that's a huge benefit. People always used to make a big deal. How if this 40, 50, 60-hour game?
Yeah,
I don't have time for that.
No, I know, and it sucks because that's like for whatever reason, I decided to go like after Arkham Origins came out like 2 years ago. I decided to like buy it. I'd already played like the first couple, and I was like, you know what? Let me just go play this one.
Yeah.
And like it's like you just don't have enough time
to
go do everything, and like you're just like I'm on. Yeah, every time you log in, it's like only 25% done.
Oh man.
No, but more and more of these indie games are coming out, and they're short experiences, but memorable, and you get a coda, and it's like a real like impact after just a few hours.
It is, and we talked about this yesterday on the Beastcast, and it's so like this has been happening for a decade already. Independent games are just like slowly but surely turning everybody's head, and it's like, oh man, there are so many stories to tell, so many different gameplay opportunities that no one ever thought of, or no huge studio would ever even investigate or take the risk of making. And it really does parallel the film industry, I think, in a lot of ways. It's just awesome stuff.
All right,
that's happening
I'm down
right
for
now.
that.
So this has been fantastic,
man. I have had so much fun. We probably went way over.
But that's fine.
I'm a blabbermouth.
You know what? It's
guess
the
what?
internet.
It's the internet. There's no rules, man.
That's right.
No rules in podcasts.
No rules, just right.
What do you got going on now?
So we've got tomorrow. CBS is hosting the Republican debate.
Yes.
So that's a big deal for us. And we're actually going to be live. This is growing. CBSN is growing so fast that there was a point in time when we were live just Monday to Friday. Then we added a Sunday. Now, especially now in this political season, we've added Saturday. So Lane Keano's anchoring 1 to 7 p.m. tomorrow in anticipation of the GOP debate. And then from 7 p.m., Nancy Cordes, who's our congressional correspondent, is going to anchor from the debate. And I'm going to be there on set in case a shot goes down, which is kind of they're like, dude, you got to come in and just be there like if something happens. Right? You can cut to you and be like, let's take a commercial. Which is going to be incredible. And then, so there's a lot going on. And I'm working on a couple of pieces for CBS This Morning, which one on a guitar luthier, which is kind of up my alley because I play the guitar.
I was going to say, we totally overlooked your singer-songwriter guitar.
I would not songwriter, but definitely,
singer, guitar player.
Playing this, we're called Impaired, and so it's cool. So there's a lot going on, but it's been great. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, of course.
I love doing this.
It's a pleasure, and I know what you do isn't easy, and it's a lot of fun watching you do what you do. And,
thanks, brother.
And thanks for having me on as much as
we need to get you back now, especially that I'm doing the mornings again.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for telling us your story.
I hope it wasn't boring.
No, man.
It'll be interesting.
I mean, it went by quick, so I know
it's become a thing now where it's like a shtick because people are always interested in how did you get here, and I've got to figure out a way to make it shorter so that people are just not like, okay, I get it. But I think at the end of the day, the one thing I always say to people is that there really is sort of a Zen aspect to it, which is that I sort of have this mindset that anything is possible. If you just really, not if you want it badly enough, because that's not the right thing to say. It's just that if you put in your mind that that you're willing to take a couple of knocks, you're willing to if you want to consider it this way, lower yourself and put yourself in a position that you haven't been in before, or that might be uncomfortable for you.
Yeah.
And no one successful in the world had a straight path to that.
Yeah.
It's there's a shattered past that follows everybody.
Sure. No, Trump has no shattered past.
Exactly.
That was the one thing I wanted to correct you when you said anything is possible.
Yes.
I was like, no, there's one thing that can't be possible. Okay, let's just make sure that's not possible. Anyway, when you tell the URL for CBSN, I tell people
www.cbsnews.com/live.
Okay, good, because that's where I tell people to go.
Cool.
It was different for a while, but now that's the best one.
Yeah, and then at CBSN Live on Twitter, my first name Vlad Duthiers, CBS is my Twitter handle, and all the correspondents are on Twitter.
All right, make sure you follow Vlad. Check him out on CBSN, and obviously the coverage that's going on coming up. Very exciting stuff, man.
Thanks, guys.
Such a pleasure having you here. That's it for us. The phone number, 866-404-CNET. Shoot us a voicemail. Follow us on Twitter at the404. We're on the Facebook. And then join the subreddit. Take part in the conversation. It's reddit.com/r/the404. We're back next week with Jordan Hoffman. We're going to be talking Oscars.
Oscars and movies.
I saw half of the ones he told me to see.
I've seen a bunch of them.
So we're in good shape. We'll have a lot to talk. And I'm also curious to hear what he thought about Deadpool. So that'll be a lot of fun. Tune in next week. Until then, I'm Jeff Bakalar.
I'm Russ Frushtick.
Big thanks to Vladimir Duthiers for being here.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Such a pleasure, buddy. All right, we'll see you next time. This is the 404 Show. High tech, low brow. See you next time. You like that?
I like that.
Yeah.